I have, as a result of listening to all the presentations, I think I have titled this presentation Generations Together, because this is what has been demonstrated so far. I think the RfP Youth Interfaith Network should be commended for this unifying initiative. Climate does not discriminate between young and old, rich or poor, caste, race or creed. Climate politics can be divisive and at times destructive. But the RfP UK Youth Network is forging a unifying effort. So this is a seminal event, I feel, for climate action, constructive rather than destructive. A brief history, because I was involved with the climate initiatives right from the beginning. The first climate expert group meeting was organized by UNEP in 1973. Then in 1992, the UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio decided to establish the UN Framework Convention for Climate Change. So COP emanates from there. That's the UNFCCC. So if you want to get the real information from COP, please go to the UNFCCC website, which is linked below. UNFCCC was established as a secretariat headquartered in Bonn, and on 21st March, world governments established an international environment treaty to combat dangerous human interference with the climate system. So COP stands for the Conference of Parties, which meets every year, and it's the decision-making body for the convention. Now, in 2015, 196 governments adopted the Paris Agreement, which was a watershed. It was a legally binding international treaty on climate change and entered into force in 2016. So COP26 could not be held last year because of COVID, and hence the reason for doing it this year. Because as the case with the Paris Agreement, governments report every 5 years. Glasgow, some of the key outcomes from Glasgow. At the Glasgow summit, the historical impact of industrialization was acknowledged, particularly by Western nations. And you can see from this chart that is based on UN statistics, the progress in terms of how humans have influenced and warmed the climate. From industrialization, hand in hand with concepts like unbridled economic growth. And so COP26 highlighted that climate action is inextricably linked to environment, economics, and justice issues. I think this is really quite important. Climate action is not just about conservation, planting a tree, or simply just looking after nature. It is inextricably interlinked. And the Glasgow Climate Pact, which was adopted by the countries, approved and acknowledged that parties should, when taking action to address climate change, respect, promote, consider their respective obligations on human rights, the right to health, the right of indigenous peoples, local communities, migrants, children, persons with disabilities, and people in vulnerable situations, and the right to development, as well as gender equality, empowerment of women, and intergenerational equity, just like what you're demonstrating now. So it is a coherent, inclusive process from this particular decision that was taking place. Of course, COP26, the Global Climate Pact, was a landmark agreement. According to Global Witness, there were 503 fossil fuel lobbyists affiliated to the world's biggest oil and gas giants who attended the conference. But despite this really strong and overwhelming presence, it is quite unique to see that the Glasgow Climate Pact is the first ever climate deal to call for a phase down of coal, to call for a phasing down of coal. Yes, at the last moment, the phasing out of coal language went really pear-shaped, but phasing down of coal remained. I'm not going to go through all of the different important sections in the agreement, but I want to point out to you also is the section on international cooperation. In my experience, bringing treaties together and past global environmental summits is that despite all the hostilities that are going on outside, it is quite interesting to see that in a moment of rare cooperation, US and China issued a joint statement saying that they would work together to combat climate change. And as someone who has been engaged in environmental diplomacy, I see this happening all the time. So also moving on to other clear, concrete recommendations that took place concerning jobs. This is an interesting point that was made by President Obama in his address to COP26. In the US, 3 million people work now in clean energy related jobs. That's more than the number of people employed in the entire fossil fuel industry. This is a remarkable achievement. So in the case of COP, I wish to say that I prefer dialogue. I prefer blah, blah, blah to war, war, war. What are the critical challenges that we face, both the young and the old? Reducing climate change for what? Today, the number of people living in extreme poverty is expected to rise to 750 million people by the end of this year. Extreme poverty is measured as the number of people living on less than $1.90 per day. But at the same time, according to the Forbes 2021 list of billionaires, there are 2,755 billionaires worldwide. That's 660 people higher than the 2020 number. So the critical element to realize is that the causes of poverty are the greatest threat to the world's environment. What is at stake? Other economic activities for the future generations, for you now and the generations to come, are based on unsustainable and profligate ways of using natural resources, on which our own existence and future generations depend. And at the moment, the unfortunate thing is that there are no discussions about alternative to current ways of creating health. David Ramsey in Total Money Makeover said something like this: we buy things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. And Wendell Berry, this remarkable philosopher, said that unlimited economic growth can be accomplished within limited space with limited materials and limited intelligence only shows unlimited courage and self-confidence of these great minds. That unlimited growth implies unlimited consumption, which in turn implies unlimited pride, covetousness, lust, anger, gluttony, envy, and sloth, and only makes the prospect even more unlimited. But despite the problems, when I go around in the world, the interesting thing is that there are environmental solutions that are also coming out of governments across the world. This concerns Belize, which is a Caribbean country located in the northeastern coast of Central America. One of the profound statements that were made at COP26 was that by Johnny Briseño, the Brazilian Prime Minister, who pointed out that Belize is a net carbon sink. Over 60% of our land has forest cover, and more than 40% of which is protected for conservation and biodiversity. Then comes Bhutan, a tiny kingdom landlocked in the eastern Himalayas. Now, what can Bhutan teach the world about climate change? Bhutan has a population of 771,612. Bhutan's ability to be a net carbon sink is partly down to its natural forests. Most people work in agriculture or forestry, which means it emits less than 2.5 million tons of CO2 each year. But then if you take Luxembourg, which is near where we live, for instance, from a regional side of things, for example, with a smaller population of 634,740, emits 4 times as much. And the Bhutanese government has rejected the concept of gross domestic product because it is illogical, and it has come up with an interesting process of economic growth to measure it called gross national happiness. Please check this out and do kindly look into it. There is also Costa Rica, the Republic of Costa Rica in Central America. The interesting thing with Costa Rica is that it is again reforested its depleted forests within about 20 years or so. Today, most of 60% of the land once again is forested. And Costa Rica has a constitution which abolished the army in 1949. And many decades of political stability has enabled it to invest in economic development and in protection of the environment. Other positive actions: 64% of the land in the Republic of Korea is under forest cover. China has succeeded in restoring a formerly degraded area called the Loess Valley, which is near to the total area of France in central China. In India, I think this is one of the most interesting faith-based initiatives, which is done on a wider scale. Isha Kriya's Project Green Hands established in 2004, has so far planted 25 million trees, acting in concert with farming communities. So there is faith action. In civic life, faith communities, with all its problems, can also be a force for good. Remember that anti-slavery, the campaign for anti-slavery, was initiated by the Quaker movement, which then led to the abolition of slavery, together with members of parliament like William Wilberforce. When Grenfell burnt, it was the faith organizations who were there to provide support to the suffering. Zakat is a remarkable process where a certain percentage of the earnings are provided by the Muslim communities for community and other good works. Now, the food banks by the Trussell's Trust reaches more than 1 million people every year in the UK. So faith communities can indeed be a force for good. The fact that humankind should live in harmony with nature is found in all faiths. So what is the future for youth action? Remember a couple of things. Those who are older like us have really not been in the sidelines. We have been right in the forefront of this initiatives taking on climate challenges. And it is important to realize that fact. And some of the older scientists, those who have been involved in these initiatives, have also sacrificed and paid sometimes a heavy price for their commitment. The Glasgow Climate Pact has two very specific decisions for young people. Section 64 urges parties and stakeholders to ensure meaningful youth participation and representation in multilateral, national, and local decision-making processes, including under the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Then this is really important for all the young people and all the organizations representing young people here. The Glasgow Climate Pact invites future presidencies of the Conference of Parties, with the support of the Secretariat, to facilitate the organization of an annual youth-led climate forum for dialogue between parties and youth in collaboration with the UNFCCC Children and Youth Constituency and other youth organizations, with a view to contributing to the implementation of the Glasgow Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment. So please mobilize yourselves and get into this process and make your voice heard. The critical thing that I would like to conclude by saying is that each of us, each person of faith, is multinational in the fact that we have communities spread right across the world. Therefore, young and old faith leaders should play a frontline role in mobilizing people to take action against environmental conflicts. Climate action is not just for COP26. What I would like to point out is that it is a pilgrimage for life. Faith and sustainability are two sides of the same coin. Sustainable development demands faith involvement. We will not solve climate change without without the buy-in of more than 6 billion people of faith communities, and these 6 billion are more powerful than any multinational process in the world today. How to sustain your commitment? This is critically important. President Obama asked people to stay angry. But President Mandela said resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. So we need to sustain ourselves not through anger, but through a process of compassion and sustained concern and commitment. Then we can move mountains. Thank you.